Radagast and Philippa Bell. I apologize if I massacred your last names a bit. So yeah, like the last European panel, the way this will go about, each panelist will have 5 minutes to present themselves, their work. And after that, we will have a round table discussion with already prepared questions. So the questions are all the questions for each of the panel today are kind of similar, just so we can provide all of the members, participants, kind of the ability to compare different continents and researchers from different continents. But more about that later. Our panelists can now present themselves, and I propose the same order as on our social media. So firstly, we can start with Dr. Philippa Bell. Philippa, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here to chat with people from all over the world. It's really exciting. My name is Philippa. You can also call me Pip. I'm from the University of Melbourne, and I've been from Melbourne forever. I would like to acknowledge that today I'm joining everybody from the unceded land of the Wurundjeri people, the First Nations people. From this area, and acknowledge that they are the first ecologists and that their knowledge runs deep, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. So I've recently finished my PhD in urban ecology, and I'm going to stick to the urban ecology sides of things today because you have two absolute powerhouses of Australian bee ecology. So I'm going to talk just a little bit more broadly. Over the last couple of years, have been really interested in our cities and spaces in cities that could be doing more for nature, and particularly green spaces and the features of green spaces that are associated with insect biodiversity, particularly insect pollinators. I looked at bees, beetles, and butterflies to understand what we can do in our urban environments to improve insect pollinator biodiversity. I looked particularly at nature strips, which are an interesting part of Australian cities. They are residential road verges that are adjacent to people's houses. They're council land, and councils being the local government bodies, but they're privately maintained by homeowners, and homeowners in Melbourne are allowed to plant gardens on their nature strips, and many people choose to do so because it makes the place look prettier and because it might provide some sort of value for biodiversity. So I went out to test this. I planted gardens on nature strips and counted the number of bees, beetles, and butterflies on those nature strips before the gardens went in and after the gardens went in. And lo and behold, when you increase the floral abundance and species richness and the structure of an area, and you basically replace it with anything that's better than highly manicured lawn, you do get some really effective benefits for biodiversity. So planting these gardens was one thing, and we have a really good understanding that when you increase the amount of resources that are available to animals, you're providing more opportunities for those animals to live and thrive in an area. But when you're in cities, one of the other big players is people, and one of the other major components of my PhD was understanding how people felt about nature in cities, what their opinions were, what parts of it they liked and what parts of it they disliked, and also understanding what the main motivators of people to garden on their nature strips and the main motivators for the councils to allow people to garden on their nature strips was. These findings were really positive. There are some really good opinions about gardens on nature strips in Melbourne and about biodiversity more broadly. People are really excited to be able to get something more interesting in on their streets, and they recognise that things other than lawns, so gardens with lots of flowers and with lots of structure, can provide greater benefits to biodiversity than a regular lawn can. So these are the sorts of findings that I'm hoping to apply more broadly in cities, and looking at using novel green spaces to create habitat for insects in lots of different areas across cities. And then when you revegetate and renaturalize lots of little areas, the cumulative impact should be quite great. I also wanted to take a moment to say that I think today we're going to be talking a lot about bees and Australia's fantastic native bees. But when we're thinking about pollinators more broadly, we've got our butterflies, we've got beetles, we've got flies, we've got plenty of other insects. And we also have a really wonderful diversity of pollinating birds, such as honey eaters, and pollinating mammals like bats, little possums, little rodents, little marsupials that are all doing absolutely fantastic work. So I might try to be the advocate for some of those other things while Kit and Clancy talk about bees, which are amazing as well. So that is me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Next, we can hear about Clancy and his work.
Okay, awesome. I'll try and share my screen. Give me a yell if I start rambling, because I could talk about bees all day long. Trust me. But I'm also a massive advocate for other pollinators, especially the unloved ones like wasps and flies that don't get enough credit. Yeah, so I'm hello everyone. I'm Clancy. I do a bit of social media about bees and flowers here in Australia. I actually have worked with both Pip and Kit on putting out a few videos, and they're awesome. They've been great themselves. And I'm also on Wurundjeri country, and I would like to acknowledge the lands that I'm on. And I love to acknowledge First Nations people wherever I go. Some cool things for European folk that are joining in. We have our own Indigenous seasons. So on the land I'm on, there's 7 different seasons. So a lot of Australians use the 4 European ones, but they don't apply here whatsoever. So we're currently in the Bitterap or Balato Nyawinya, plenty of sun. This time of year, you see the female brown butterflies. And here we call bees, depending on what language group of the Kulin Nation people are from, bees are known by Marambara and Marnalong. So there's just the cool things how I'd like to acknowledge First Nations people before I start. And yeah, this is me here. I grew up obsessed with nature, loved David Attenborough, love Steve Irwin, love National Geographic, and yeah, now I just go and find cool bugs in the Amazon and make social media, but also was lucky enough to do some pretty cool research. And some background in bees, which I think Kit might probably touch on some of this stuff, but we have nothing of the data sets that are as comprehensive of what you guys do up in the Northern Hemisphere, where it's a constant battle with the lack of data. We have over 2,000 species here. 500 of those don't even have names to begin with, not even described. And like for my study area, when I was conducting research, in the whole of Australia, there's hundreds of thousands of record just in the whole state, which is probably the size of I don't know what percentage of Europe, but in my study area in the whole of Arnhem Land, which is the size of about Belgium, there was about 50 records. So it's very, very lacking in data. And the reason I was conducting the research was because the native bee honey in the remote area and Aboriginal communities up there were noticing there was declines in the honey, and they were noticing the shifts in the time of year that flowering plants were flowering. So, things that could potentially be impacted by climate change. So we went up there to have a look at that and had this 2-way knowledge exchange with the First Nations people. And we're using DNA metabarcoding on the pollen of the bees that we were collecting. And when we're collecting the bees as well, doing a pretty standard sweep netting procedure. When we're looking at, I don't want to get right into the DNA, go full nerd about it, but it was pretty cool to put the DNA metabarcoding work to scan all the barcodes of the pollen on the bees and see where they were collecting pollen from. And what we found was there was 23 different species in the study site. 4 of those species didn't even have records in that whole state of the Northern Territory, and 4 of those species had no literature of the host plants that they had collected pollen from. So just some really, really cool records. And when we were making the bee and plant interactions, we had a whole bunch of plant taxa from the different bee species, and we built some really cool meta-barcoding networks, but between the plant species on the left and the bee species on the right. And we did this throughout the dry season to capture, when different things are flowering, if the same bee species are around throughout the year, whether they're trying to keep going to those flowers or whether they're changing their preferences, when things are available and this sort of thing. And what we found with this was that a lot of the bee species in the area were pretty generalist, which I think one thing Kit will probably bring up is that a lot of our bees in Australia are actually quite the opposite. So this was a bit interesting to see that we don't have many fussy eaters up in that study area. And we also found that the flowering plants were some species were flowering later, some were flowering earlier based on the herbarium records. It was a bit erratic, and yeah, so there's definitely great. Would love to see that it's part of a longer term monitoring project that's over many years, so that we can turn the baseline data into some really, really nice trends. But yeah, there was some initial findings, and then I'm not sure if I had much time. Maybe if I had a minute, I've just got some just for you Europeans, just some really cool iconic bee species. I'll flick through some of these. So Amygdala, which has our blue banner bees, our Thyreus or cuckoo bees that parasitize the blue banner bees, Megachile, which has your resin bees and leafcutter bees, Lipotriches or Nomia bees that love to buzz pollinate. We have heaps of Callidids, pretty diverse group here in Australia. Lots of Hyloides or wasp mimics. Lasioglossum is another really diverse group, and we find those a lot in our cities because they're can be a bit more generalist. Our stingless bees, we have 11 species of. Our carpenter bees, which are absolutely huge up in the top end. Lots of Hylaeus and Hylenae bees, Echinura and reed bees. Euryglossa, which are a really underrated one because not many people know about it, but they're super, super diverse. Eucalyptus specialists. And our stenotridids. And these are super impressive. Some Ctenocholides can burrow up to 3 meters into the ground. So yeah, that's my end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm already super interested in everything for this panel. Okay, Dr. Kate, you have the floor.
Awesome. So I've got a little presentation as well. All right, so I'm Dr. Kit Prendergast, and I'm also known as Bee Babette. It's a stage name. I'm also a performing artist, so I like to bring my circus performer life with my sciencey life. So I've also got an array of some of our native bees behind me in the slide there. Up the top, a Leoproctus, and then middle we've got Amygdala dorsoni, a male, then Elastiglossum on the right, Euryglossine embolia on the left. It's really tiny. It's on my finger. It's like 2.5 millimeters long. It's really small, and it's part of the Euryglossinae, which is an entire subfamily that's endemic to Australia. But based on some research I did, most Australians don't even know that they exist, like aren't even aware of the word. Then we've got a female Amygdala dorsoni in the middle. The Amygdala dorsoni is one of our biggest bees, and they're really cool, really interesting mating habits. A Hylaeus on the right there. Down the bottom left is one of the Stenotridae that Clancy talked about. This one is Stenocoletes smaragdinus. The Stenotridids are an entire family that's endemic to Australia. So lots of our Australian bees found nowhere else in the world, which is really cool. But we've got entire subfamilies and families that are endemic here. In the middle bottom, that's Megachile erythropyga. It's the most common bee to use bee hotels based on my research. And down the bottom is a Trichocoletes, and he is a Fabaceae specialist. So really amazing native bees. So I have done lots of different things. I started my PhD on bees in urban areas and also looking at the impact of honeybees on native bees, how we can best support native bees, what flowers they like, bee hotels, and then I've done lots of things since. I do SciComm, I visit schools, so lots of different things, which is why I really love being a bee scientist, because I can do really cool things and it's very fun. So this is a paper I published with some colleagues a few years ago. Our native bees in Australia are under threat, but there's very little investment into them, very little research into native bees. Like, I'm so jealous of you guys in Europe where you've actually gone and assessed and listed your bees on the not the EPBC Act, your equivalent threatened species lists in Europe, and have put them on the red list. In Australia, we have 3 listed bee species, but we know that there's so many more that are threatened with extinction. And unlike you guys, we don't have a pollinator strategy, which is why, even though I've got no funding to do it, I'm creating a Australian native bee and pollinator conservation strategy, because in Australia, everything is focused on the honeybee, which is an introduced species here. I know in Europe, it's still managed and it can cause problems when it's like overabundant, like any livestock species. But in Australia, it's also an introduced species. So when they're out in the wild, they're feral. And despite that, they get billions of dollars by government, by bee charities. There's lots of bee washing going on in Australia. So we found, all the threats that we know bees and pollinators, they are operating very much in Australia. Australia's got the biggest record for mammal extinctions on anywhere in the globe. You can imagine that, our insects probably aren't doing as well, but just not being monitored, there's no monitoring. So lots of issues here, but lots of really cool bees too. So part of my research is, can honeybees harm our native bees? And I found yes, they can. So here's some of my research. And despite this, the main bee charity in Australia is encouraging schools to put honeybee hives. They lobbied to put commercial beekeeping in national parks. Like, you wouldn't let cattle, we've finally said no to feral horses being in national parks. I love horses. I studied horses before bees, but I still think they shouldn't be in national parks. So yeah, the main bee charity has lobbied to put commercial honeybees in parks, even though my research and research from others across the globe has shown, yeah, this super generalist, very adaptable bee can harm native bees through competition, through disrupting pollination networks. So a big part of my research when I was doing my PhD was, what habitats, what flowers are best for our native bees? And resoundingly, native flowers. And it's just not any native flowers either. So many of our native bees are specialists. All the Euroglossinae are, lots of them specialize in the Taceae, which are our gum trees. That's like our dominant group today. I was just sweet netting the Mari, which is Corymbia calophylla, and I recorded 81 different bee species visit Mari. Like 81 species. That's like so many visiting just one plant. So what we plant really matters. And bushland remnants are so important in cities. We can, create gardens, but we have to protect the bushland. We can't say, oh, we can clear this patch of bushland because we're going to put in, some gardens. Not the same. And yeah, our native flowers, super important. And that's some little mural I designed with a good selection of some great ones. I also have worked on climate change and fires. So Australia is a very fire-prone continent. I'm in southwest Western Australia, so other side of the country, from Philippa and Clancy, but I've also lived in Queensland. I'm currently on Wajak Noongar land. It's quite different, like Australia's such a big continent, we've got such different climates all over, but very fire-prone, especially in Western Australia, and also in Melbourne. Melbourne recently had some, like Victoria had terrible fires recently. So fires are a very hot topic here, prescribed burning as well as increase in wildfires. So I did a review on the impact of fire on bees, and like most research on bees, it's very bias towards North America and USA, and also in Europe, where it's, you know, different vegetation. But different bees respond differently to fires, which suggests that we can't just have one fire regime that suits everyone. We need to consider specialists, have refuge for them, and have our fire regimes when we do prescribe burns that consider bees. I also trialed using bee hotels as a recovery tool after fires, and it was very successful, which was great because I put up 1,000 of them, and I hoped that all that work, especially my dad helping me make so many, it wasn't all for waste, it wasn't. So that was great. And I've also written a chapter about the impact of climate change on bees. Taxonomy. So Clancy noted so many undescribed species, estimated 500 undescribed species. Very few have keys. It's really hard to ID them. So I'm a taxonomist as well, and I've described 2 species so far. First one, Leoproctus zephyr, which I named after my dog. Specialist on Jacksonia, so not even a family, specialist on a genus, and specifically really loves Jacksonia sericea. Only occurs in 7 places on the Swan Coastal Plain, very fragmented, like more endangered and specialized than a koala, but zero conservation protection. Then Megachile lucifer, I described last year because I really love lucifer. And it also has horns on its head in the female. And yeah, this bee visits a critically endangered plant, and for lots of our critically endangered plants, there's been no studies on what pollinates them. So many gaps. But I was like, I need to describe this species because it visits this critically endangered plant near where there's mining. So SciComm I do a lot as well because as I found when I did a bit of research, because I was curious, I wanted to know what was the most popular bee in Australia, and also what you know, Australia's public knowledge of bees. Few people even knew any scientific names. The Amygilla, the blue banded bees, were definitely the favorite. Everyone loves them, but almost no one knows or loves the Euroclosidae. So I really try and raise awareness about the underdogs of native bees, and also about pollination and pollinators as a whole. I have a SciComm show about plant sex and bee sex called The Birds and the Bees, which is really fun. And yeah, I think I realized that, you know, I was getting asked to do all these talks, but it was always to garden groups in like the same demographic. And I was like, we need to get everyone interested in native bees and pollination. So I created a circus comedy show. And that is me.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Very interesting. Yeah, so this is the first event where we have an entire panel of people from outside of Europe, and where they will be talking about outside of Europe. So you already covered kind of the first question that I wanted to ask, and that was to try to compare the Australian fauna with European fauna, which obviously it would be difficult because if you didn't study European fauna. But just based on your presentations, I think we got a pretty good idea about the bees in Australia. By just the visual, you have very colorful bees. And you mentioned Stenotiridiidae, that's the only family that lives only in Australia, but you can find other families around the planet. So maybe just going with another question, what are the biggest current threats to pollinators in Australia? We asked the same question to panelists in European panel. So just to get, what are your problems as researchers, and what are the problems with what are bee problems?
So I'm obviously particularly focused in urban areas, and urban expansion in Australia is a really big issue. We don't seem to be going up, we are going out. And so land use change, particularly the transformation of rural areas into urban areas, is a really big issue for our insects and for all other animals, really. When we build on agricultural land, even though it's not the best land that's around for our insects, you know, it's could be filled with pesticides, it could be heavily degraded, it might not have any natural grasslands or natural vegetation left in there, but there's still space and there's still bare ground and there's still water and there's, you know, still some nature happening. And when we go and bulldoze all of that and put in really big houses on really small blocks, and we concrete everything else, and we put lawn or fake turf in all of the other places, we're then creating a whole bunch of impermeable surfaces where like bees and beetles and other insects that nest underground can't access those nesting resources. And we're also keeping everything really neat and tidy and not allowing for those little micro habitats that our insects really need. On top of all of that, there's hydrological changes. When you turn an area into an urban area, water doesn't seep into the ground anymore, it runs off, and the ground stays really dry and really hot. There's also the temperature changes because the heat is being absorbed into the black asphalt and the concrete, and things are staying hotter for longer. So that's what I'm particularly interested in, and that's a big argument that I make in my research, is that we have lots and lots and lots of things all around the world and in Australia that are impacting insect pollinators, and urbanization is one of those things, and sort of has a bit of a cumulative effect of some of the other impacts as well, like heat, hydrological changes, the reduction of habitat, and land use change.
Thank you. Clancy, Dr. Kit.
Clancy, do you want to go first? And
Yeah, okay. So yeah, second everything that Pip said. Some of the things that are impacting Australia in particular that people might not necessarily talk about is the fact that we're as disconnected as a society as we ever have been. You know, the algorithms are taking over our social media, so we're disconnected from each other, we're disconnected from nature. You know, our young people are growing up not knowing about the biodiversity we have. There's the shifting baselines that, you know, the young people growing up don't realize that what we've already lost, and how, you know, it's not normal to have a clean windscreen when you drive for 20 hours. Just like those sorts of things. So the public perception is a big thing, because if we don't care about it and we're not learning about it, then why would we care about it and want to protect it? And so there's that side of things, but then there's also the people that are in charge of protecting it have no priorities in our country whatsoever to actually protect it. Our current government has approved 35 different fossil fuel projects and extensions for our coal mines and gas projects and different things, and that's in the last 3 years. So they've just like every month they're just stamping a new project, which is, you know, wrecking our environment. And then when they are, and same with development, so when mines are clearing land or when housing development is legally clearing, there's no one gets held accountable. They might, you know, make $1 billion and get $1 million fine, go, oh yeah, perfect, who cares, we're going to keep doing it. So you have, you know, the people that as a society are disconnected and not really wanting to care and fight for change, and then you have the people that are incapable of the change that are doing quite the opposite. So there's sort of like a whole societal shift that needs to happen for us to, even before we start to address protecting them, let alone the threats that are already facing, like the land clearing and the climate change and pesticide use and all those sorts of things.
Thank you. Good.
Yeah. So I'm going to say, like, whilst urbanization is bad, based on a review I did and based on the biggest cause of land clearing in Australia, it's agriculture, especially livestock agriculture. And the biggest form of land use in Australia is grazing. And, you know, while mining is bad, but at least they have to, and there's so many things wrong with offsets, but at least they have to do something about it. If someone wants to clear land and put cattle on it, they, free reign, don't even have to do any offsets. And of course, livestock agriculture is the second biggest cause of climate change. For greenhouse gas emissions, if you look at grazing land, not many trees, not many flowers. It's grass. It's no good for bees. And yeah, like that's something that's not talked about at all. It's not in the media. It's not in the news. It's probably because it makes people feel uncomfortable. But at the same time, it is one of the most powerful things that everyone can do just by switching their diets. And it's very doable. And yeah, it's a huge issue everywhere. The Amazon, lots of land clearing for beef and livestock grazing. But yeah, it's a huge issue and it's just not being talked about. And of course, yeah, pastoral land is shit for bees. Like, at least in cities, we do have, in Australia at least, like bushland remnants, and there are people like flowers, like at least, there's many flowers that aren't great for native bees, but we are seeing a shift. But in these agricultural landscapes, there's less incentive to, support the native bees, because in Australia as well, most of our native bees, they're not pollinators, especially not of crops. Like the Euroglossinae, they swallow pollen, and they're tiny, they're really shit pollinators. So there's also this narrative, like such an agricultural country where, like, oh, save the bees because they're pollinators, save whatever because they're pollinators. It's a pity. I wish like people had the same mindset as they do with like koalas. It's like, we don't save koalas because they perform some ecosystem service. They don't bring any monetary value except maybe tourism, and native bees indirectly do that through wildflowers. But yeah, such a livestock economic driven country, and I really wish we could shift that mindset. And it sort of like ties into what Clancy was saying. Yeah, we need to educate people and make people care about nature, because we are nature. We're not separated from it. Evolved from a common ancestor.
Thank you. Such many good examples that I can connect other questions to. But questions are designed so we can go from these more bleak topics to more positive topics by the end, hopefully. So you all will be motivated. Just to follow up about the climate change. It is a generally popular topic, but I'm interested in how is climate change shifting species distribution across Australia and your bee biodiversity and your pollinator biodiversity. Australia is already pretty hot country, so I would assume that climate change is affecting you, or maybe even more than it's affecting Europe.
I have to be honest in saying that I'm not entirely sure. In Melbourne, we can have some pretty crazy weather, and we are seeing, especially in the last couple of years, a little bit extra craziness to that weather. Things have been either very hot and very dry, or quite cold and very, very wet. There are some insects that would prefer some of those things and some insects that don't prefer those things. For a climate change related question, I am going to defer to Clancy for his knowledge on phenology and flower timings and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I can jump into the timing of flowering, and probably Kit could jump into that as well after and go a bit more in depth, and particularly around the distributions, and she's a bit more across like the diversity and ranges of different things. But for on an Australian scale, we have some interesting things that happen with the flowering phenology of plants. So say, for instance, in our alpine regions, we're having the like flowering periods extend, and even with the warmer weather, when it goes through the summer period and the warm weather is extending into the April, the autumn season. And what's happening in some of the alpine species is they're flowering a second time, but the pollinators have not adapted to being around at that time of year. So they're flowering for no reason. Like the plants are hurting themselves by flowering again at an unprecedented time that our pollinators haven't evolved to. And same goes with the intersection between when the bees are active and the flowering plants are flowering. It's probably something that has been discussed a lot in Europe as well. One thing we have in Australia with our tropics is some of the tropics species are under sort of threat with the not being as much of that buffer zone with the thermal tolerance of bees. And we've had some research in Queensland by one of our friends, Holly Farnan, who's an entomologist, who looked at the exposure of stingless bees to pesticides, and even like, you know, if they were still tolerating the pesticides, it was like decreasing their thermal tolerance or making them more susceptible to extreme weather. So there's some really interesting things around climate change impacting that as well as the bushfires. We're a very bushfire prone region, and when we're having these unprecedented heat waves, it's increasing the probability of these incredible bushfires that nothing comes back from. They turn the landscape into an absolute ecological wasteland. So yeah, there's a few different things where climate change is impacting our phenology and our native pollinator species. If you want to extend on anything there, Kit.
Yeah. So with the records, what's really shit, as I mentioned, is we don't have any monitoring programs, like scientific monitoring programs. So we don't really know how any populations are doing, except on Kangaroo Island. There's this gorgeous bee called Xylocopa aurata. It's one of my favorites, like this metallic green one. I have a tattoo of them. They're beautiful. But the fires have gone through Kangaroo Island twice and almost wiped these bees out. Colleagues, Dr. Katja Hodgendorn and Dr. Remco Leeds, and a few other colleagues there have been monitoring them. And yeah, after the first fires, they put all these nesting blocks out and it was successful, and then fires went through again. And then on Kangaroo Island, there's this rare strain of honeybees. Of course, it's still managed, and because there's so much interest in these honeybees, they're able to just put the honeybees in these recovering areas. And then my research with the bee hotels has found that when there's more honeybees in an area, there's fewer native bees nesting. So yeah, we've got these compounding threats. We've got fires, and then we've got government putting money into helping beekeepers after fires and letting them put them into these vulnerable areas when the native bees they can't be moved around. They can't just go unlike honeybees, well, I'll forage on this and then I'll forage on that. We did do some modelling. So whilst we don't have monitoring, we did some modelling, and we found, based on the 2020 fires, that additional 11 species of native bees should be on the threatened species list based on how the fires wiped out their habitat and their life history traits. What we've also seen with climate change, lots of our native plants have such short flowering windows. I'll go do a survey a month, and the next month plant isn't flowering. So if we've got these shifts with plants starting to flower earlier, or they dry out earlier, that's shortening the flowering window for native bees. And based on research overseas, on average, plants are blooming earlier, but the bees aren't matching at the same rate. So they're emerging when the plants are starting to senesce. Hasn't been looked at in Australia, but probably is happening. And yeah, as I mentioned, lots of our native bees, they can't go, oh well, I'll go forage on something else, because they can't. They're really fussy. So those are the main things about climate change that are happening in Australia. And drought, that's a huge one. And whilst native bees don't need water for drinking, drought disrupts nectar flow, and then other impacts of climate change like increased CO2 can alter the pollen and nectar chemistry. Hasn't been studied in Australia. I think there was an experiment, but they haven't published the results yet. But yeah, lots of interacting threats with climate change.
Thank you. You kind of already mentioned this and touched upon this subject, but regarding the how does agricultural expansion impact the native pollinator communities? Maybe the question would be more towards how do you approach your communities of farmers and people who are producing food to get them more on your side of conservation of pollinators. In the last panel in Europe, we talked about how one of the effective approaches is to speak more from economical side of the things, where you basically tell them that if they conserve pollinators, they will have more profit because there'll be more food that they produce. But like Kit mentioned, a lot of your pollinators are not really the best at pollinating. So what is your approach to talking to local farmers and food producers?
The really interesting thing about farmers and food producers is that, and this is like a massive generalization, is that they feel like they're doing the absolute thing that they must be doing for society, which is feeding people. And above all else, what they're doing is feeding people, which is very important, feeding people. So sometimes approaching those conversations can be difficult. I've certainly been in situations where, and this isn't a pollinator thing, this was a mammal study that I was helping somebody with. We were going onto agricultural land in New South Wales looking for broadtooth rat habitat. And one big concern that these farmers had was, well, if you find land that's appropriate for the broadtooth rat, which is an endangered mammal, they think that you're going to try to take that land away from them. And that's a very valid concern that people have. So sort of approaching these sorts of conversations as, no, we're finding space for both you and for the nature, and we're going to try to do this in a way that benefits both, is important. That economical side of it is very important as well. In New South Wales, they have a buyback scheme where the government will actually, it's not buyback, but the government will pay people for the higher quality habitat on their land, and they'll pay them a stipend so that they can block that land off. They still own it, but they block it off from their livestock, and they get a little bit of money to kind of for the upkeep of that land. So that's sort of a sharing approach to agriculture and to nature. But again, it is a very sensitive topic. Livestock farming is absolutely massive in Australia. It's one of our biggest exports. People have been livestock farming here as soon as they showed up with sheep and with cattle. And so there's generations of farmers who are not always open to change. I've been chatting to some people recently about how they approach the economic conversation, because that's a big area of research at the moment that I'm not entirely familiar with, but has some very promising outlooks.
Yeah, I feel like there was some great points there, Pip. I haven't really had much experience myself with directly engaging with farmers and food producers here in Australia, but I have grown up in regional Australia, and I think, I'm not sure what it's like in Europe, but what tends to happen, like what Pip said, is a lot of the time people from regional remote areas in Australia are not open to change whatsoever, generally speaking. And so, yeah, like a lot of the time farmers aren't open to like having renewable energy projects on their farm, or would rather have a monoculture on 100% of their land. So it is like a hard one to break through. But on the positive side of things, just if I went on a broader scale to sort of more general society, and like breaking through to people on social media, like we actually are seeing trends in Australia with like native nurseries are having to put on more staff, or like they're having to resource more like native seeds and things for their plants, because they're finding that through persistence of like social media, and like there's seems to be a trend around people wanting to like plant native plants in their garden, and like especially in like urban environments, trying to like decolonize our, like in Australia, when we first come over, we decided to bring Europe with us. And so all of our cities have got, like, a lot of people come to Australia from Europe and probably feel at home because they see plane trees and they see like oaks and elms. And we're sort of trying to go back to planting native species for our native biodiversity. And there is a bit of a trend going at the moment.
Yeah, I agree with Clancy, and I've worked with farmers, actually doing a research project right now. And the thing is, whilst like charities or like we need pollinators for food security, we protect all pollinators and they all work together and like this harmonious thing in pollinating our crops. Like the researchers found majority of pollination in Australia of crops are European honeybees because the crops are European. And so what I think we need to do is change this really colonial mindset. It's really, the colonial mindset has done so many bad things to Australia, and realize like everything has a right to exist on this land. And native bees, the native wildflowers, they were here long before Europeans and the European exotic plants and animals came. And I feel like the way to encourage farmers is to, make them fall in love with our native bees. Like, it's not like, oh, they are the best pollinators, but look at this thing that's really cute and is like, has these blue bands on its butt and does like head banging buzz pollination. Look at these tiny little things that when you look under the microscope, they're like squee. Just so, yeah, like changing the mindset. And that's, I think, we're not going to do it with like those old farmers that have been on their farm for like, their whole lives, but children, talking to children, like, we need to protect nature. If it's gone, it's never gonna, like, it's not gonna come back. You can't just plant some more canola fields if they're gone. If these like little native bees or these wildflowers are gone, they're gone forever. So yeah, it's about, I think, education, and that's a big gap. Like, I never learned about native bees in school. So I think education, especially to the younger generation, and talking to farmers, whilst there are organizations that are using like the dollar, the research that I'm doing at the moment on canola pollination is showing that honeybees are the main pollinators, but we know that honeybees can harm native bees, and they need different things. Honeybees love a huge diversity of lots of different flowers. Native bees, they might just want just eucalypts, and honeybees like eucalypts as well. So wildflower strips are excellent, but you can't say to the farmer, well, if you plant this wildflower strip, it will boost pollination, because you might just draw all your crop pollinators away from the crop, because eucalypts are great, they ooze nectar and pollen. So the economic argument, whilst I think has worked really well in Europe, I've been reading your pollinator strategies, it's either a lie if we say that in Australia, and I don't want to say lies, or we have to shift people's mindsets that it's not about pollination, it's about biodiversity and protecting biodiversity. We don't say, oh, we have to save this habitat for koalas because they're pollinating, I don't know, some carbon offset. We need to, use the same love that we have for koalas and put it towards our Indigenous insects.
One thing that I want to quickly add, and this is echoing the argument for education, even in like university Bachelor of Agriculture students, I have run into students who A, didn't know that European honeybees weren't literally the only bee in existence. B, didn't know how those honeybees were actually pollinating crops, and then just had their minds absolutely blown by the fact that there are other bees out there, and that some of them are blue, and that some of them are metallic, and that they're all really cool.
Yeah.
So even at the university level, because when you talk to children, like, it's so easy to amaze them, and they lap it up and they absolutely love it. And, you know, they can name more Pokemon than they can native animals. So we could have got to teach them about the native animals. But at the university level, where we have people who are our age and who are engaged on social media and also engaged with our farmers, not knowing that other bees exist and not even knowing how pollination works, that to me is a really big problem.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I was literally blown away. I was chatting with some agriculture students at a school thing, and we were walking through the garden, and I was like, "Oh, look at that little native bee," and they were like, "What? What do you mean? That's not a bee?" I was like, "What do you think bees are?" And they just thought that it was
things that make honey and live in hives.
Yeah, exactly, exactly that.
We do share the similar problems in that regard in Europe as well, regarding the native bees and honeybees. And we also do share the same problems with beekeepers and large amounts of beehives in one area. There were some research regarding the honeybees in the natural protected areas, which something that I also didn't know is not something that is just happening by local people, but it's also something that the natural area leadership invited people because they wanted more pollinators, because obviously they didn't know about the native bee existence. But following up on other questions, from my perspective, mostly because of some TV shows, Australia has very strong environmental rules, specifically about getting different food and biological material in your country. So I'm wondering about, do those laws actually work? And if you could change just one policy regarding your laws, or just general policy about nature protection, what policy would that be?
So you mentioned getting things into the country. So are you asking specifically about biosecurity
Yes.
laws, or just our environmental laws more general?
Well, both. I'm familiar by the TV shows that it's very hard to import any type of food, or even like a household plant in your country, which I think is a really great idea. But I'm wondering, does those laws actually work, like in principle? And if you can add any other laws or any other, generally political agenda or about conservation, what would you choose to add?
I mean, we have biosecurity locked down. We're doing, as far as I know, a pretty good job of it. I have seen presentations from biosecurity officers, and they're always, putting out spot fires at our ports and that sort of thing. So I'm not too familiar on our biosecurity, but I have too watched plenty of Border Patrol. I think what we're lacking is looking after the things that are already here and the things that we have and we should be protecting. We recently made changes to our EPBC Act. That's the Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation. That's our federal legislation. It's lacking, for lack of a better term, it's lacking severely. It's not protecting the charismatic things that everybody loves, and it's definitely not protecting all of the little things that people don't know about. So getting insects and getting pollination as an ecosystem service into those laws is very important. I don't know exactly how that would work. One thing that South Australia has done recently that I think is very cool is that they have written into their new state Fauna and Flora Act some very intricate little pieces of legislation that allow for better protection of what we already have, and also for better protection of what we don't know exists yet. They've put a nice little bit of nuance in that legislation that means that when we discover new things and when we finally get enough data to say that these new insects are under threat, they then become under the protection of that act, and they're not just a foreign thing that we've never known about before. There are a lot of people with a lot of very strong opinions of our laws in Australia, and they're all quite valid.
Yeah, I'm the same. I've watched a Border Patrol, and I'm pretty impressed with how we do with keeping things out of the country. Like, for instance, varroa mite only first appeared maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, and they've put out a few spot fires, and it's only like the last year and a half-ish where it's started to actually take over Australia. I think we're the very last place it's gotten to, or one of the last places varroa mite's got to. But yeah, like the nature laws in Australia, they were like a little bit of an improvement when they recently changed. But you know, one of the top 4 priorities of the new nature laws was to fast track housing development approvals. And I'm not making that up. If you Google it, that's like one of the top. That was one of their top priorities, and they like are happy with that. So yeah, there's some really concerning things, and like they've implemented like a executive duties for our environment minister, who is not environmentally minded at all. And like when we talked about the fines of a mine that recently cleared heaps of beautiful forest, that was like they never had the correct approvals, but it was given like the all clear under, like they say, natural interest, because you know they might make a few $1 million out of the mine, or it might add to the economy, and it really doesn't anyway. And so there was like this recent report about, in Australia, we literally, like, a lot of our budget of our government like directly funds activities through subsidies and tax concessions that will actively harm nature or lead to the harm of nature. And so that's the link I've just put in the chat. And so we have things like up to $15 billion to fund and subsidize fossil fuel production and subsidies to that. And through like transport and infrastructure and the land clearing that's associated with that, big business. And what's really concerning about this is the total cumulative amount of this funding in our budget is so much greater than the budget we actually set aside for biodiversity and conservation in Australia. I'm not even sure if we're in the 8 figures, the 9 figures, because like it's under $1 billion, and this is well over $20 billion for subsidizing things that are going to harm nature. So on a national level, like, you know, up at the pointy end of things, we've got a whole lot of restructuring and rejigging to do to try and put nature first, and biodiversity first, rather than big business.
Well, I've never watched Border Control. So I'm not a one out here. But I have like worked with Invasive Species Council, and they are very passionate about what they do. I do wish that I could have a tortoise. So I wish our laws were a little bit looser. Like, a tortoise is not going to become an invasive. And then like anyone can own a cat. Like, I have a cat, but she's only indoors, like never ever outdoors. But yeah, anyone can own a cat, but a tortoise is not going to go on a killing rampage. Anyway, that is my TED talk about we should have tortoises. But so yeah, biosecurity, Australia's pretty good. Probably helps that we're like surrounded by ocean, but interestingly, there have been some introduced fees that like obviously honeybee, but that was intentionally, but unintentional bees, like Pseudanthidium repetitum, which is a carder bee. And it started in Queensland, went down to Victoria, and then I recorded it in WA, but it's not causing any harm, and it's very cute. So some things slip in, but overall pretty good. Even with our like honey, we've got really strict laws. So in Western Australia, you can't bring honey from the East Coast into WA. And weirdly, you can't, like, anyone can have honeybees, but you can't have, here in Southwest WA, you can't have the sugar bag bees, even though, like, it's a big question that keeps me up at night, why there's no sugar bag bees in Southwest WA, because we're a biodiversity hotspot. We've got like amazing flowering things with the same latitude as Sydney where they are. But yeah, like, we can't even move native animals around the state by law. So very strict on that. But then when it comes to like the things that really matter, terrible laws. So those guys have covered most of them, but just like the ability to clear native vegetation if it's in economic interest, like there needs to be way stronger laws against clearing of native vegetation. And like the EPBC Act only covers species that are listed as endangered. So if something's endangered but it's not listed because there's not enough data, there's been no monitoring, so this it's not being described situation for many of our native bees and other invertebrates, then it doesn't matter. Like, I've done surveys where there's going to be a road that's widening, and I found 30 species of native bees there, and they're like, well, none of them are listed, so it doesn't matter. We can widen the road. Who cares? So yeah, stronger laws against clearing of native vegetation. But what I'm realizing is we can't rely on government, so that's why I'm creating an Australian native bee and pollinator conservation strategy. And whilst I'm going to put it before the government and hope they listen, I've already emailed them. There's this international thing called, I think it's called Promote Pollinators, and 30 countries have joined, and you can only join from the government. And yeah, 30 countries, even like third world countries have joined. And I've emailed the environmental department of the federal government, and they're just like, oh no, we cover pollinators in some legislation or whatever. It's like, no, you don't. Like, oh, we talk about ecosystem services. And yeah, there's a lot of greenwashing and bee washing in Australia. So yeah, lots of things I would like to change, but I feel like it would be great if the law could change, but really we need to start with ourselves and the communities and the next generation.
Thank you. And thank you all for very descriptive answers. You're covering most of the questions that I prepared today, which is good because we are obviously limited by time. Just to dive deeper in some of the things that you already touched upon and mentioned, because I can ask you in Australia about this. So how important is the indigenous ecological knowledge in Australia pollinator conservation?
Massively important. Indigenous Australians have been caring for country for 60,000 plus years, and that knowledge runs deep, and that knowledge is passed on through stories, and most of it is verbal and not a lot of it is written down. And we talk a lot in Australia about reconciliation and knowledge sharing, and knowledge sharing is not always something that non-Indigenous people are sort of, we don't have a right to that knowledge. So Indigenous knowledge is absolutely incredible at a depth and a breadth that with Western science we are not reaching. So one thing that I think we're always shepherding is a respectful collaboration with Indigenous people, and promoting multiple ways of knowing and multiple ways of like thinking about things. You can go out and quantify a vegetation community and quantify an insect community and make your evidence-based assumptions about what's going on there. But I think that there's always plenty of things that we will be missing out on because we don't have a deep connection with country. Something that I'm also particularly interested in our cities is recognizing that even though there's not always a lot of nature there and that it's really heavily modified, it is still country, and trying to encourage people to find ways to connect with the Indigenous knowledge that is all around them. So that our native pollinators come into that, and our native plants come into that, and watching our native plants and our native pollinators interact. And going down to the Yarra, which is the big river that runs through Melbourne, Birrarung, and listening to Birrarung and hearing what it has to say. So Indigenous knowledge in Australia is extraordinary, and I don't know everything about it because it's not always for me.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely integral to so much of the decision making, especially anything around the environment. What people in this call might not know is that Australia, when we were colonized, spent hundreds of years trying to genocide all of the Indigenous people, trying to remove the culture, trying to get First Nations people to assimilate. And although physically First Nations people were always, oppressed and just absolutely brutalized, their spirit was never broken, and they've managed to survive hundreds of years of the worst treatment ever, and their culture still persists. And now, after we've pillaged the land and ruined a lot of the ecosystems or degraded them, now we're going back full circle and saying, oh, well, what we're doing is not fixing anything. Now we're going back to the First Nations people who still have this extensive knowledge of the environment and are so deeply connected to country and the climate and the knowledge of environmental everything. And now we're going back to ask for help. And this is why it's great to have them as a part of the conversation again, and really needing to find these ways where our two-way knowledge exchanges can be, super beneficial and respectful, because there's one way of, it can be very different ways of including Indigenous perspectives in research and in decision-making, because there's ways which are, extractive of information, or there's ways that are, getting like the sort of the last minute advice or consulting so that they can tick a box, rather than having Indigenous knowledge as a key aspect of the whole process. And there's like these things that we create with these knowledge exchanges where at times it can be cultural load, because it can be, you don't want it to be extractive, or the colonial load of First Nations people being disconnected from country and disconnected from their culture because they've been dragged into the Western systems to become a part of it, and finding ways to be really respectful in these exchanges and making these collaborations rather than consultations. And it's just such an important thing. And there's a few ways where it seems like we're heading in the right direction, but there's still a whole lot more work that's needed to do, and more resources and energy invested into it.
I don't have much more to add, I guess. Because they know the land so much better. Like, they've been here 60,000 years. Australia was only colonized 200 years ago. Like, how can you properly understand a place, such a young knowledge system from the Western perspective? They have such a good understanding of the seasons and how things are changing now. They're able to witness climate change is real. Not that should even be a question, but they know what's happening. So it's very apparent there. But we do need that two-way exchange as well, because they are aware of some of the bees, especially the sugar bag bees, because they make honey, but most of the other bees they unaware of. So that's where it's really important to, like, what I've been doing is in a like two-way exchange, having the privilege to go on country and learn about the land there, and then I can go and survey the bees, identify them to species level, take macro photographs and say, here, like, look, these are the incredible indigenous bees that are on your land, like that they're a part of your country. So then, they can feel ownership of the biodiversity they have there. So yeah, it's, we need to work together with these things.
Thank you so much. Here's a question that will be asked to every other panel except the European panel. What lessons could Europe learn from Australia's conservation approaches and vice versa?
That's a really difficult question to ask when you don't know too much about what's going on in Europe.
True. Maybe let us know what you think you're doing the best. What do you think that works in your continent?
Struggling to think of the good things. Would either of you guys like to go first?
I'm happy to start off. Like, I've done quite a few literature reviews, so read a lot of research from Europe. I am so jealous of your bombus. That's another one. We've got to introduce bumblebee in Tasmania, but like, damn, they're so cute. So what we can learn from Europe, and that's what I'm working on, is your pollinator conservation strategies. So having an actual strategy that's developed by scientists, not just like random people all developing their own thing, like an actual evidence-based conservation strategy that can be like adopted. Because I feel like more and more people are getting interested in bees in Australia, but they might be misinformed, and so they can actually do more harm, with just like the honeybee example, like putting honeybees in schoolyards, or saying, oh, like, I'm helping the bees by putting a honeybee hive in my backyard. So having an evidence-based conservation strategy, and you've got some really, like, Simon Potts, he's such like a guru of bee research. So yeah, your pollinator strategies and your networks. I think in Australia, what you might be able to apply there is how we've been starting to really look at, I guess, the impact of introduced plants and introduced bees. And I think because honeybees aren't introduced in Europe, it hasn't quite been a thing yet, but they are livestock species. And so how is keeping many honeybees in an urban area or something, how is that impacting the local native bees there? Because even though honeybees are native, before people kept many in hives, there wouldn't be such a high density of honeybees. And when you compounded that with land clearing, it can potentially cause some issues. So maybe looking at what we've found in Australia, and some ways that we can help find a balance. So that's what I think might be good to look at.
Yeah, awesome. You're on the money yet, Pippa? I can jump in.
Oh yeah, I did think of something actually.
Awesome. Yeah,
there's a couple of really neat sort of community level initiatives that I've seen in the UK and across some areas in mainland Europe. One that I love that's come out of the UK is No Mow May, which is councils and homeowners not mowing their lawn or other grassland areas during May to allow the wildflowers to grow up and to bloom. One of the things that we find a lot in Australia is because we have this very strong European mindset of what a garden should look like. It's very ornamental. It's filled with exotic plants. It might be filled with standard roses and hedges and a lawn. It's all very neat. And one word that is often used to describe Indigenous vegetation is messy. So having initiatives that sort of support wildflowers or support something that's a bit different from what people are used to, and doing it in a way that allows people to see firsthand that spaces that are filled with wildflowers don't have to look messy. They can look really beautiful and also be supporting our pollinators. I think that's really important. So I don't know exactly what our equivalent of No Mow May would be, but I'm a big advocate for getting more native vegetation in urban areas in an ornamental way that's beneficial for pollinators, but also showing people that this vegetation is really beautiful. One other thing, sorry,
I was just about to say, like, it's so weird that idea that all our native things aren't pretty. Like, like billions of people come to Western Australia for the wildflower season. So why not put wildflowers in your garden? They're pretty. They are really pretty. And yeah.
I know people won't even let the white clover bloom on their lawn because then you're not looking after your lawn, and then you're a bad homeowner, and then you're a bad person. Like there's social norms and social levels to these kinds of things. But it is really annoying when our wildflowers can be a tourist attraction in one location and a mess in another location. I'm also a big fan of this Twitter account. I haven't used it since it changed from that, called Shit Lawns. And I think they would go around and take photos of people's houses that had fake turf in their front yard, and then people would just absolutely blast it online. I really enjoyed that sort of community level, sort of like thing to change people's opinions of something can be really super effective when you're actually down with people. Yeah, really powerful messages.
Yeah, one thing I would like to bring up is something that Australia does really good, and I'm not sure where Europe stands on this, but at things like our conferences and just like the culture between academics, like you can see probably just from this call, the chemistry that me, Pip, and Kit have, like because it's probably a little bit more of a smaller like academic community, and we're a bit isolated here in Australia. But we go to these conferences, and you know everyone gets there, gets along. It feels like a reunion for some of the scientists that haven't seen each other, you know, all year or for a few years or whatever. And we go to the dinners and have drinks and stuff after, and it feels like a real awesome community. Because I have heard that like it can be a bit more cutthroat in like North America, with people being scared to talk about their research before they've published it in case it gets stolen and like those sorts of things. Whereas I feel like in Australia we're a bit more of a uplifting culture. I'm not sure if people agree with me fully there, or but I feel like that.
I just wish conference fees weren't so expensive. Like,
yeah,
I would love to go to more, but yeah, having to pay like $500 per day, yeah, and yeah, when you have like a little child, like I do, yeah, makes it hard. But I miss conferences. But I agree, like they're, especially the ento conferences. They're always, I don't know, entomology people are weird in such a good way, and it's really nice.
Can I extend that, sorry, beyond the academic audience even, and this is an absolute shameless plug for the Victorian Biodiversity Conference, which was held at the University of Melbourne just this week from Monday to Wednesday, which, another shameless plug, I chaired. And I would be really interested to know if you guys have anything similar. So Victoria, just being one of the southeastern states in Australia, it's a completely volunteer-led conference. We welcomed 550 people to the university to offer a full 2-day conference experience along with workshops. And definitely recognizing that big conferences like ESA, the Ecological Society of Australia, prohibitive costs for a lot of people. But conferences can be done in a way where, you know, we offered a $75 ticket to students and a $125 ticket to non-students. No idea what that is with conversions, but like it's cheaper than just the food was. Clancy has been a part of that as well, and Kit, we are hoping to get people started doing that in other states too. So I think this event here is a really, really nice like aspect of that. I'd be super keen to hear if you guys have other small style conferences that are more accessible to people, and maybe at a more local scale, where academics and land managers and councils and the state government can all get in the same room talking.
Yes, Europe has a lot of different conferences, and I would suppose that most of them are volunteer-based for organization. Sadly, from my perspective, they're not really standardized, so you can't really find all of the conferences on one site, and some of them are, some labs don't really have LinkedIn pages, Instagram pages, so it's very hard to follow everything. That's kind of the whole point of YEB. We're trying to have that everything in one place. But yes, I will check it out, and all of the panelists and all of the participants of this event will receive an email with all of the literature and everything that the panelists already sent. And if you wish to send more, obviously send whatever you think is the best. Sadly, we are out of time. We have only 3 minutes. So you can have 1 minute for like a final opinion, final message to all of the participants and young scientists passionate about protecting pollinators.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for having myself and the others along. This has been really enjoyable. One of my favorite things to do is to take people and take them into an urban environment and to look for things. And no matter what somebody's background is, they're generally super excited and really impressed of how many little critters can be found in quite small spaces, even ones in cities. So that's something that I think people should be really excited about, is taking their knowledge and sharing it with other people, and taking other people into spaces and letting them discover things themselves.
Yeah, I'm the same. I love doing that. Love social media, and I feel like it's my turn for a shameless plug. Kit's the same. If we love social media. So yeah, feel free to give us a stalk. Add us on Pippi on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah, we're on LinkedIn. My Instagram handle is Bees and Blossoms. Love making social media and stuff on there. So there's a quick shameless plug for seeing some of the cool Aussie bees and environmental sort of things this way.
Yeah, I think we just need to get the message out there more, because there's nothing to like not love about native bees. So yeah, give us a follow. Bees and Blossoms. I'm bbabette, BE.BABETTE_performer. Like, check out our native bees, and we love. I'm speaking for everyone, but I'm sure everyone loves seeing the bombas. We love your bees too. And I think, yeah, just like getting people to love native bees, and then getting them to understand what they need, because yeah, there's so much unlearning to do, because so many people, like, yeah, honeybees, they need a hive, they need pansies, and yeah, so just opening people's minds, hearts, and then the science will follow.
Thank you so much for being a panelist on this event and this panel, and joining us today and sharing your perspectives, your knowledge, and your research. I'll invite you to stay for the rest of the event. And again, thank you. And right now, we are going to have a lecture from Dr. Rosa Vasquez. Again, apologize if I butchered your last name, Dr. Rosa. I see that you entered the meeting.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Can you guys hear me okay? No, that was great pronunciation.